Hello, everyone. Thanks for taking a look at this Q&A at NexBotix about automation. I'm Nick Proud. I'm the Director of Software Engineering at NexBotix. I look after all the tech and all the software that's built to make automation possible. And I'm joined today by my good friend, Chris Parker, who is, just remind me about your job title, Chris, because it seems to change all the time.
It's a hybrid role. That's fair enough. So I'm a senior consultant at NexBotix, working in a business analyst / project management capacity with a little bit of customer success for fun. But I'm also essentially a sales lead in the business as well. So working a lot with our partners for reselling, but a lot of the outbound sales activity as well.
Amazing, yeah. And we're going to talk today about some of the things that you guys have asked us about automation. So we're going to keep it quite high level. We're going to define some aspects of automation and hopefully talk a little bit about AI as well, because how can we not? So without further ado, let's get into it. I'm going to go through some of the questions that we've been given, and we can try and formulate some answers for you. So the first one that we've been given is, how do automated processes work? So quite a general question, a good one to kick us off with, because hopefully gives us a broad introduction to automation. But I'm going to kick this over to you first, Chris, from the more commercial perspective. How does an automated business process work?
Okay, I suppose there are a couple of angles to this. How does an automation work in terms of an engagement, and what do the processes look like afterwards? So when we're automating business processes for organizations, what we believe in doing is implementing very impactful technology, but in a non-abrasive manner. So we will start off by executing a discovery, where we'll help you analyze relevant processes for automation. That we'll then do the design, build, test, and implementation. So we'll scope out the existing process, map it out as it exists, put together our as-is process flows and our click-throughs for the technical team, and then we'll design an automated solution which we'll build, test, and implement for you. When we implement these technologies, we do it in a non-abrasive manner. So we'll implement the technology slowly. We'll make sure we're not impacting other live running processes, make sure that everybody's very happy with the change, properly trained up in how to use the tech. And we provide a lot of support during that implementation process and beyond, especially with NexBotix, because we offer that fully managed service. You essentially have support from us in perpetuity.
Yeah.
But in terms of what an automated business process looks like, maybe I can flip that back to you, Nick.
Yeah, so you've done a really good job of describing the initial phases of onboarding to automation with NexBotix, and then where we're picking up from now is where we chuck it over to the tech guys and actually build the thing, essentially. So once that discovery process is done, what we essentially build on our side is a center of excellence for your automation. So we become an extension of your team in that regard. So we'll start by appointing someone as an architect, someone who can look at the business process that we've discovered and first say, is there anything that we could potentially change about that process to make it better before we automate? So it's not just a blanket, let's just automate all the things. It could also be, how do we optimize as well as automate? And then we'll build that architecture, and out of that architecture will come a built automated business process. And that looks essentially like a bunch of scripts that sit on various machines that we can call bots. So say you had an invoice processing process, which was quite straightforward. You had an invoice that comes in on an email. That just needs to be checked against some other data in a system and then posted into, say, NetSuite or some other kind of accounts payable system. Then we would build a series of scripts which carries out that process, and we'd use some technology which standardizes that automation process. So we'd write a script which picks up the email, we'd check the attachment against some other data, we'd do the post. All of that is informed by that initial discovery process, and the fact that we've translated the business process into. Sorry, I got a notification there. We've translated that business process into a technical solution. So we may have already optimized it slightly, but what we eventually get to is that UAT, which is the user assisted testing, where we present you with what we've built, and we get you to test that along with us. But before that point, we do have lots of regular check-ins where we play back what we're building to make sure it's still in line with how you guys would do the original process, because that's very important in the sense that there may be things that we didn't find during the discovery process, because we can't always remember every different aspect of our job. Essentially that's what a business process automation looks like with NexBotix. It's to sum it up, it would be taking the original process that you do every day, that repeatable, monotonous work that you do, and having it just run either in exactly the same way automatically or in a more optimal way in the background, with you just intervening whenever you need to. But I guess we'll get to that later on in the Q&A.
No, I think you raised some really interesting points there, Nick. I really like what you mentioned about optimization before automation and the importance of that initial discovery. Is this a feasible and a desirable automation for your business? Are there any tweaks the client could perhaps make to that process to bring more of it into scope for automation or make it easier to automate? Are they at the right level of maturity to consider automation? Being in sales, I come across lots of organizations that seem to be in a mad rush to be efficiently inefficient. But because we offer a fully managed service and we offer our technology on a pay-as-you-go model as well, we're really not interested in making organizations efficiently inefficient. We want them to be an automation-first organization that thinks about automation in the long term, which means being at the requisite level of maturity before you begin. That was a really interesting point. And there seems to have been, in the questions that have come through, a lot of confusion about just what is automation. Now, what is RPA? There are so many different descriptions for robotic process automation. Is RPA and automation the same thing? Was one of the questions that came through.
Yeah. And this is heavily debated, isn't it? Because it's changing all the time, as is the case for most things in tech. As we see AI becoming the norm, what we used to call RPA is now turning into intelligent automation. And so, what is RPA? I guess if we strip it back to its really simplest definition, RPA, it stands for Robotic Process Automation. We're looking at taking repetitive human-led processes and handing those over to software. So robotic is in the title, but it often conjures these connotations of physical robots sitting in a plant and doing things. And in some cases that might be part of the process. If we were automating an automotive process on the factory level, we might be automating software which speaks to robot arms on the floor, but that's very specific. What I'm trying to get across is that it doesn't necessarily have the same connotations as you would see with robots, so to speak. It's robotic in the sense that it's repetitive. You're doing pretty much the same thing each time. So it is just software which takes a process and allows it to be, that allows the mundane processes like data entry, like routing of data, moving around of data, communications with templates, all that sort of stuff, to be done automatically. Now, I guess that's the simplest definition of RPA, but what we do at NexBotix is add a different flavor of RPA by sort of splashing in elements of AI, but also bringing the human back into the context. Because I think that's one of the things that scares a lot of people is, okay, anything with robots or automation and it means I'm out of a job. And that's just really not the case. So we've actually built a company on the idea that humans are needed as part of automation. So if you think of it as, say you're somebody whose job it is to manage accounts payable. Again, I keep using the invoice processing example because it's just the easiest one for me to go to. Part of your job might be inputting data and matching it from invoices against other parts of a system. That's not the only part of your job. It's just a monotonous, mundane task that you have to do. It's fairly high volume, and it would benefit from just being outsourced. Essentially, that's what we're offering, is a way to outsource to software. But we completely understand that there's an element of risk in taking a human out of that process. And you want to be sure that there's always a way of managing the unexpected. So we do RPA, but it's RPA with a twist, with human intervention. So we have a platform that the bot can post to whenever something unexpected happens, and then a human can tell the bot what to do. We have elements of AI in the software so that we can extract content from documents without having to train a model or anything like that. So I would say that we are doing, at the bare minimum, RPA as we traditionally define it, but we're also enhancing it with that human intervention and elements of AI. And AI is obviously becoming more and more present in what we do.
Yeah, I've often been interested in the terms that we use within automation, like robotic process automation and artificial intelligence. It does sort of conjure up the wrong image. I often refer to terms like collaborative intelligence. I like
Yeah,
what you said about outsourcing to software. It's more around providing digital assistance to do the work you definitely don't want to be doing on a day-to-day basis, rather than a bot or a piece of software replacing the human. And we are incredibly effective at that. The fact that we have our own proprietary technology and an incredible suite of consultants means that we can offer that human in the loop, human workflow focused automation, but customized to the idiosyncrasies of the businesses we work with, all of the different exceptions and errors that might occur, the convoluted approvals workflows that they have to deal with. And whilst that all sounds incredible, we have had a lot of questions from people saying that sounds very expensive. Like, what does it cost to automate? And that's a difficult question to answer. There are, if you're a smaller organization, there are off-the-shelf automation tools you can buy to automate very small pockets of a process. You might have an off-the-shelf OCR extraction option. Generally speaking, we see that these aren't necessarily that accurate because they can't take into consideration the idiosyncrasies of your processes or your business. So even if you are lucky enough to get 60 to 70% extraction from an off-the-shelf OCR tool, the amount of investigation required to deal with the exceptions and errors that occur because that human in the loop element isn't taken into consideration essentially negates the whole point of having them. And the same with Microsoft Power Automate have a competing tool, and if you're a smaller organization, you can use the free version to digitize small tasks. Once you start putting serious volume through it, it can get very expensive. And we are partnered with the major vendors like UiPath and Automation Anywhere, as well as having our own proprietary tech. Their initial starting packs often start at around 20 to 25,000 pounds, but then you have to develop your own center of excellence to implement it, which could cost you 500 or 600,000. So the offering that we have is slightly different. In terms of how we charge, our costs are broken down into two parts. You have the one-off professional services cost for the design, build, test, and implementation of the solution. The ongoing support, if something breaks, having somebody come and fix it, having those SLAs in place is all built into that cost for the managed service. And then you have the ongoing technology costs, the use of our NexBots and our platform Naya, the NexBotix Intelligent Automation Hub. That's for transactional processes, let's say invoice processing, our favorite process to reference. We might charge per document scanned, or if for a JML process, it might be per joiner, mover, or lever. If it's a non-transactional process, it might be bot hours, which are calculated on a monthly basis, and then you would be billed monthly. So it's the fairest, most accessible payment model for this technology on the market at the moment, to put simply. But yeah, it's a very difficult question to answer because there are so many options out there. I don't know if you have any thoughts on the cost of automation and how that's changed.
Yeah. No, I think to your point that you're right. It is difficult to cost, but I think it's a nice problem to have most of the time. Like surprisingly, it is a nice problem to have because the cost, while being difficult to quantify, is very easy to make flexible, and it plays back into what we're trying to do. I mean, I often hear you refer to NexBotix as a boutique software business, and I think that's a great way of describing it because we don't conform to one way of working. We'll mold a package around a customer because it works for them. So some customers might prefer to have a system that is chargeable based on how long the bot runs versus how many documents or how many levers it processes. In most cases, it's very easy for us to cater a payment model to the customer's needs. And so that's quite unheard of in the automation space, especially with a SaaS business. a pure SaaS where it is just, this is how much it is per month, or this is how much it is per run, on top of all the licensing you've got to build. Oh, and also you've got to build it yourself, all that sort of stuff. So I think the pricing flexibility for us is linking more into the mission, which is to lower the barrier of entry. And I think that's also linked back to why it's hard for people to understand what RPA is if you're not technical necessarily, because it's so inaccessible unless you're a certain size of business. People don't necessarily understand how automatable things are. They're actually, there's a lot of things you can automate that are a bit of a revelation to people, and part of that is obviously maybe the technical understanding, which is fine, but also just the inaccessibility, and so our pricing plays into that massively, because it makes sense. It's win-win if we can find a way of lowering the bar, or lowering the barrier of entry, more like, by changing a pricing model, not just per customer, per process as well, because the idea is that we demonstrate value in one process area, maybe as a pilot or a proof of concept. And then what most customers tend to then do is have this explosion of ideas. That means that they think, oh, well, actually, we could do this process and this process. And then we've built that framework that allows those processes to come in in different pricing models. So it's all, for me, about just the flexibility of the pricing model. That's so important.
Now, that's interesting, because I do a lot of analysis of intelligent automation projects that have failed for new prospective customers. And in a lot of cases, they've essentially gotten very excited about the prospect of automation and bought a load of technology, which they're going to pay for upfront for a 12 to 36-month contract, before strategizing how they're going to use that technology, and it ends up just sitting on the shelf, which is technically a failure. Apart from that, things like, I'd say 99% of the failures I've investigated, it came down to comms and governance, that kind of thing. Which leads on to one of the questions that we've gotten through. What should we be considering when using automation tools, or starting to adopt intelligent automation tools?
Yeah, so this is a really good question, and I think if you ask yourself this question when you're embarking on the automation journey, you'll set yourself up for success, because the worst thing you can do is just try to, like I say, automate all the things on day one, because there are a lot of variables that come into all the different processes that you might have in your business. So the approach we like to try and take is to look for I want to say lowest hanging fruit, but that kind of sometimes has a negative connotation. But it's where we can provide automation value the quickest. So what often happens, and we sit in a lot of calls with customers who are trying to figure out how to get started in automation, don't we? And they very often just say, right, we've got this huge process, and this happens here, this happens there, but only if this is true, then this happens over here. What we often do is say, whoa, hang on a second. What are the key elements of this process that actually allow you to either save money or generate revenue? Where are you going to see the most value? Let's target those first, because you might actually have part of a process which is super easy to automate technically, but it's also really high value in terms of the comparison between how much it costs you to do it manually and how much it costs you to do it automatically. So with a lot of customers where we've been able to do that, where we've been able to sort of slow them down a little bit and say, let's take your happy path and automate that, they then see that value much quicker. They see the return on investment much quicker. They trust us as a result, because that's really important for any consulting business where you have to earn some credibility. That allows us to then embark on another project, or maybe look at more of the complex items within that original project. I think it's all about, the question obviously is, what business processes can we automate? I think you could say, well, anything technically, but the best processes usually are the most repeatable, the ones that don't necessarily require a massive amount of context, but can be assisted by human knowledge and human context. I do think it will change as we start to use more AI, because I think we'll see more bots that are making their own decisions, which is a little bit scary. So we're very guarded about how we do it. At the moment, the AI play for us is more about accelerating automation. So we're often taking the things that have always been fairly straightforward to automate, but automating them that much faster thanks to AI. That's where we are at the moment. So I would say look for repeatable processes, invoice processing, HR onboarding, credit, or credit checks. What am I referring to when I'm chasing people for invoice payments, that sort of thing?
Credit control, the dunning
Credit
process.
control. There we go. I'm a techie, not a finance guy. A lot of things where, in fact, actually classification of items as well, which then spills more into that AI space. We're seeing more use cases for determining where to route emails, for example. These really, it's like Outlook rules on acid, that sort of thing. And sentiment analysis as well. So, automation in places where you're trying to improve your customer success. So you might be, looking at reviews on your e-commerce site and using AI to determine if something's negative, and then kicking off a process that actually contacts the customer to say, hey, is everything okay? You might be using it in IT to look after servers. I actually did have an automation system in a previous role where we had our own automation product, and we had another product which was a chat server, basically. So it was, those live chat things on websites. We used to write those, and we were using our automation tech to monitor those servers. And then the lucky person who was on call in the evening, if a server went down, the automation service would see who's on call and then call them. And then a robotic voice would say, this server's down. I was one of the people who did get a call at 3 a.m. with a robot telling me that a server was down. That was always fun. But, that seems really complicated, but actually, it's a repeatable process. So it's kind of endless at that point, because most processes are repeatable. It's when you've got really complex decisions, that's when it becomes more difficult, but not impossible.
Yeah. It all comes back to the importance of discovery. The amount of times that we speak to organizations and their process of discovery was to find the highest volume, most complex, elaborate process for us to automate, which is a very good way to set yourself up for failure, really. And you really need to start by establishing what are the strategic priorities of your business. What are you looking to achieve in the next few years? What are your major blockers? Are there any major system changes coming up that might impede or impact our ability to deploy an automation? Are there any operational considerations, around governance or regulatory compliance that we need to take into consideration, until we finally move on to process metrics to establish where are the high volume, repeatable processes with the least amount of process steps and systems involved, essentially the lowest hanging fruit. So we can have a nice, cheap, quick engagement, get you a really swift and strong return on investment, secure that senior stakeholder buy-in, which is so important. And then those companies get to pay for the expansion of their automation strategies out of resource saved rather than out of profit, which is why we find it so easy to land and expand, to use a salesy term.
Absolutely.
Excellent. So we've got a fair few questions that have come through, actually. The next one was, we've just covered which business processes can benefit from being automated, but one that came through quite regularly was, why automate if my existing process works? Which is quite funny, because that it's whether a process works or not is really rather subjective.
Yeah, absolutely.
And even if it works, it could probably be working a little bit better. Why not push for a little bit more efficiency? And why hand over competitive advantage to your competitors who are using automation to simplify their processes and improve their management techniques, make their business more agile, and save themselves a considerable amount of resource whilst improving their recruitment and retention. But still a relatively complex question. Why automate if my existing process works?
Yeah, I mean, it is complex in a sense, but I think it's also, once you get down to it, for me, it's quite straightforward. It's kind of what you just said. Like, if you don't, your competitors will. So the question I would fire back is, do you want to be left behind, or do you want to sort of, I'm not going to say fade away. It's a bit grim, but you will be sort of stuck in a rut. And I think you've got to think about employee morale, because even if you're not looking to restructure, having a decent level of morale is going to, well, first of all, it's just a nice environment to work in, but you're going to get boosts to productivity in other areas as well. And I think I think we all usually care about progression, about making sure that we're doing everything we can and using the tools that are available to us. And I think it's the same for us with the tech that we use at NexBotix. If we don't investigate AI, then other automation businesses will. So that it's the same question that comes into any business, because every business is a software business at the end of the day, whether they're using it for automation or if humans are engaging with it, software is there. So why not, get the most out of it, essentially. But I think it is just down to, I guess I like to think that most people get the idea that there's no point in not investigating it, because the whole idea is that it should pay for itself over time, and over a very short period of time as well. So, why not?
Yeah, very true. And we try and, ameliorate that resistance by offering free discovery sessions to clients on the first interaction, which I think is really important. But I think a lot of this resistance comes from a question that propped up quite regularly when we did our surveys, which was, are bots going to replace humans? Now, we have already addressed this to a degree, but it came up so often, and it's talked about so much in the media that it was probably worth raising again. And of course, we have addressed this. If anybody's looking to reduce headcount by using automation, they're kind of setting themselves up for failure. This is not a good success KPI to be pursuing. I personally have never worked on an engagement where, after we've reduced an accounts payable team from 10 to 2, they've gotten rid of those people. They repurpose them into the business, into more revenue earning, strategic, creative positions, compounding the benefit of that automation. We save them a lot of money on a process, but we increase the value of their people, which in turn has amazing impacts on retention and recruitment as well, which is basically a universal problem regardless of industry at the moment. But I don't know if you can put some fears to rest on this particular question.
I'd like to. I totally get the fear. I'm not immune to it. Software developers are feeling this as well. The speed at which ChatGPT can write code that works is kind of scary. But I want to address something that you said just about redeployment, just before we go into the alleviating fears where possible. How many times in your business have you said, it would be so good if we had a person that did X, Y, or Z? Okay, you probably already have people that can do that stuff. They just can't be freed up. I've been in that situation so many times where I've thought, if only I had this person who could do that thing. I know this person over here could do it, but they're just so busy with the whirlwind, with the day-to-day, everyday stuff. So freeing them up to redeploy them into that, how much in recruitment costs are you saving? Probably quite a lot. Like, I dread I love going through recruitment because I love engaging with new people, but I know it's going to cost me a fortune, So if I can redeploy someone who I already know can do the job, then fantastic. So that's where I am on that. I completely agree with what you're saying about redeployment over restructure, if that's the right way to put it. In terms of fear of losing your job, the best advice I can give anyone is, if you're already following AI or automation, then most of the battle is won, because you're going to be ahead of the people who are just burying their head in the sand. I don't think it's nothing new. People's jobs have been at risk from automation for a long time. I think it's just that the recent AI boom has now made it so that people are more open to it. They're more excited by it. People at the top are more keen to jump on the bandwagon. So yes, there is more of a risk, but there are ways that you can mitigate it. I'd say if you're someone who is in these roles where we're talking about, where you are doing these repetitive tasks, it might be data entry, or if you spend the majority of your job moving data around in a sort of not so complex way, then I would definitely start looking at your skill set and look at the more strategic aspects of the role you're in. Because what AI and automation is really good at is finding and updating data. So any situation where you're interrogating data, or you're running some kind of analysis, that is something that could, I'd say in the next decade, is probably just going to be the norm for it to be an AI that runs that. But I don't think that companies necessarily have an appetite for the risk that comes with adopting AI, as in full on just adoption at the moment. So what I mean by that is, you're not going to see in the next year massive companies say, right, an AI is replacing a whole human's job. I think you'll probably see a supervisory role come into play. And I kind of equate it with, if you think about, I mean, I'm going to take this is the most cliched example, I guess, but, we had horses, and, when the car was invented, that became the new norm. Before that, you would have an abundance of jobs around care for horses, because that was the way people got around.
Mm.
As soon as we had the car, it shifted, and you could still get a job caring for horses, but it was a lot more niche, because that would have probably, the purpose of that would have been maybe for racing or for breeding, or that it shrunk rather than disappeared. But when we invented the mechanic, so there is always an opportunity to reskill. I think what people don't yet understand is what they're reskilling for when AI comes in, or when automation becomes more prevalent. And I would say my prediction is that there's going to be a lot more roles that involve supervising these AI systems, or supervise. We're already seeing it with NexBotix. If we bring NexBotix in to a business, we're getting the original executors of that process to monitor the bots and to tell the bot what to do. And it's no different for AI yet. Until we get to AGI, this artificial general intelligence, which really scares me, honestly, because we're talking sentience here, then I don't think you're going to be in a situation where we just turn everything over to the bots. But I do think we'll turn a lot over to the bots with human help. So that's probably a long-winded answer, and I hope it does alleviate some fears. But the takeaway from that for me is, you have options. Keep your ear to the ground, and make sure that as soon as you see those new roles coming in, you're positioned to take them, essentially.
No, I think you've covered a few really interesting points there. And we have seen, I was just in a meeting with an accounts payable team for a housing association. Before we'd automated that process, some of those SMEs had been there. Subject matter experts had been there for 20 plus years, and we're a little bit nervous about the change. And now they've gone from moving data around to being stewards of an automation, whilst also being much more focused on things like supply relations and handling the more complex cases and approvals workflows that are necessary within that organization. So they've reached new levels of efficiency that they didn't expect. They're all much more engaged. They've gone from being very trepidatious to really embracing automation in a very short amount of time. And we see that again and again. You also made an interesting point about the receptiveness of the market to automation because of the advent of generative AI, which feels almost, borderline fetishized at this point, with, superstar ChatGPT leading the way. And, I would agree that these forms of AI certainly aren't commercially viable for organizations to start amending their operating models on, just yet. We've seen examples of law firms who have tried to use AI to put together arguments for opposing counsel and things like this, and ultimately having fictional cases being put together, which having been told they're not fictional, and all of these kinds of things. But it sounds like you think that this new generative AI wave is very real and that we're going to see results in the not too distant future.
I mean, I think the biggest examples for me have been things like Microsoft Copilot, GitHub Copilot. These copilots that come in, they're very well named because a copilot is going to work with you, not instead of you. So if you, at the moment, it's all about acceleration. It's all about shortcuts. So, I use it all the time. I use ChatGPT all the time. If I need to build some test data, for example, say I need to build a list in a very specific format for a system that I'm building, do I want to type all that stuff out, or do I want to say to ChatGPT, give me some examples of a product you would sell separated by commas and no longer than 100 records? If I can say that in plain English and have it like that, then great, because that is a monotonous, mundane task that feeds into a more skilled task in the whole. So, I think that's where it is now. And so, yes, you should be less scared if you know how to use those tools to accelerate your work. Because, think of it like taking credit for the AI's work at the end of the day. If you can deliver a project that much faster because you were able to ask ChatGPT to build a few things for you without using any sensitive data as well, that's a warning. Don't put that in. Then, who's going to get congratulated for that at the moment? Well, it's going to be you. Even if you say that you use ChatGPT, a lot of the time, I would say, well done, great. But there's not going to be. I think at the moment, you are only seeing it in these massive enterprises, and it still costs a lot of money. And if you want to automate a process with AI, but need it to have a lot of context, you need to feed it a lot of very domain specific data. And that's something that's still quite low on the maturity scale. Like general questions to an AI, to a certain extent replaces things like Google. For me, looking at coding questions, I used to go to a site called Stack Overflow to see other humans who'd had a similar issue. But now I can say to ChatGPT, I'm doing this, I'm seeing this error, what could it be? And I can ask it in a very specific way about a general issue. But if you've got, say, a business process which needs lots of very detailed context about your business, its market, personal information, it's difficult or expensive to get AI now that can do that. And so you're still going to need humans to feed that context in. So I think at the moment, I wouldn't be too scared. But I would stay vigilant. It is the key. And certainly for smaller businesses that we're serving, we're looking for the small to medium enterprise because it's still that much harder for them to get into just normal automation, let alone AI. So yeah, I mean, I'm not terrified yet, but I think if you're not thinking about AI, then you're doing yourself a disservice.
No, I think that's quite right. And you've actually just led us on to our final question, which was, how big does my organization need to be to seriously consider intelligent automation? And I suppose that my orientation would be that there isn't an organization on the planet that couldn't profit from automation. Do you have processes of a sufficient volume to warrant an engagement with a consultancy or a vendor is, of course, a different question. So if you are a very small organization, a few dozen people, looking into what you can get out of AI, there are free versions available. How can you utilize ChatGPT to put together contracts quicker, or these kinds of use cases is certainly something you can consider. We generally target organizations from sort of 200 seats up to 5,000, just because we feel the upper market is a little bit more saturated. And we offer really good business cases for organizations of just a couple of hundred seats. We actually have customers that are even smaller than that. But I would say if you have one FTE or less dedicated to a process, you probably won't have a sufficiently exciting business case to warrant an engagement with a consultancy and a vendor. However, if you have 2 or more people dedicated to a manual process, it's likely a very strong candidate for automation. We secure, on average, a positive ROI in 3 to 6 months for our customers, dependent on the size and complexity of the process. And we need at least 2 FTE to be dedicated to a process before we automate to secure that level of business case. But I don't know if you have any additional thoughts on that.
Yeah, I do. I think it's really good to be really clear about the business side of it, because you might have you might have technical people watching this to figure out, okay, what's viable, and they need to understand that there's still a business case that needs to be provided to this. It has to pay off essentially, but I think we are on a mission to lower that even further, because in my opinion, the thing that governs whether the business case actually costs in, whether it's actually cost effective, is down to the professional service aspect, because we do offer that custom build of the automation, the extension of your development team essentially, or the creation of your development team if you don't have one. So I think over time we're hoping to bring that down so that more businesses with maybe smaller teams can benefit, because we build reusable components all the time. So if we see a lot of common processes, rather than saying, okay, we're going to build everything from the ground up, over time, as we accumulate this wealth of experience and we engage with more customers and more processes, what comes out of that is more repeatable components. So it means that we can eventually say, oh, actually something that would have taken 4 weeks to develop might just take a week now. So your professional service costs will be a lot lower. Therefore, actually, your business case might now be viable. So it's something that is getting better with time. But we do. I think it's the fact that we specialize in a lot of legacy software, because a lot of automation barriers come from software that's really old. We work with customers who've got terminal mainframe systems still, and and I understand, especially with banks, if it works, why change it? Because our business processes are so critical, time critical, or financially critical. So I think don't feel bad if you engage with us and we say, actually, right now your business case doesn't cost in, it's not yet cost effective, because you'll be able to still find that out for free. Essentially, that's a free service to be able to find that out. Fantastic. Then you can start to think, okay, how do we make it viable in the future? And then you can continue to engage with us, because in a year's time we might have brought those costs down as a result of the work we've done. So we are on a bit of a mission, and for me that mission is just people shouldn't have to struggle to get into automation. So let's make it as simple as possible for them.
Quite right. Sounds like a no-brainer to me. But I think we've exhausted all of the questions that have come through. So thank you so much, Nick, for joining today. Thank you for listening to the NexBotix Q&A. There'll be many, many more. Please keep sending in your questions. We'll see you again soon.
Cheers, guys. And don't forget as well, if you want more information about what we do, some more deep dives into some of the products that we've built, just search for NexBotix on YouTube. There's some videos on there that give product overviews that talk about how we build automations and how you could potentially benefit from RPA and intelligent automation. So until the next one, see you soon.